We might not be able to say that we're a believer, but if we are truly seeking the Lord, then surely we would be seeking a marriage partner who also is truly seeking the Lord.
Welcome to the Strength in Truth podcast. This episode is advice for people wanting a relationship. It's from a Bible study on Sunday, the 1st of September 2024 at Bethel Strict Baptist Chapel, South Chard.
We are influenced more than we realize by modern culture. We're influenced more than we realize by what becomes normal in our society. But today, especially with this subject, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to marriage, what used to be normal in our society, which was more of a biblical way of looking at it, is just totally the total opposite of what is biblical. Even the most basic things, when it comes to having just two genders, male and female, even something as basic as that is put into question, and people today say, well, if a man thinks he's a woman, then he's a woman, and these things are just in something so basic as that. It's completely opposite to what God says in His Word. He made them male and female. And then when we come to the subject of marriage, marriage is looked upon by society as being something that isn't important. Many people live together before marriage and just see marriage as something that they add on, or just a reason for a celebration. These things can affect our views on things. When something which is abhorrent to God becomes normal to the people around us, we can begin to see things as less of a sin than they would have been seen maybe 50 or 60 years ago. So we see there, right in Genesis 2, that marriage was instituted by God. It's not something that is man-made, or it's not something that people can change to suit them. It's between one man and one woman. That is what God instituted. And so people that think that a man can marry a man or a woman, it's not marriage. A complete perversion of what God intended. In Genesis 2, we read, after Eve had been created for Adam, in verse 24 it says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." The coming together, the being one, is only for the marriage union. And Jesus reiterates this point in Matthew 19. Casual relationships, as many people have today, and living together before marriage are an abomination to God. In Matthew 19, and at the beginning of the chapter, Jesus again repeats the words of Genesis 2. It says, "For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they two shall be one flesh." And then in verse 6, "Wherefore they are no more two, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." Today, man would laugh at this, really. The spirit of our age is, people say that it's our body, we can do what we want, and they throw out these things. But God has instituted marriage for the good of mankind. We see there back in Genesis 2 that Eve was a helper, a helpmeet for Adam, and so both Adam and Eve were to help each other, and the marriage union is there for the benefit of society, for a stable environment for children to be brought up in. And casual relationships before marriage, people living with each other before marriage, are committing fornication. Even to look upon a woman with lust in your heart is to commit adultery with her in your heart. So even the thoughts, even lusting after somebody who you're not married to, is to commit a fornication or adultery in your heart with them. And so we can see how far away we've gone from God's ways, when even the look of lust is counted as fornication or adultery. So whenever we consider these things, we need to come back to the scriptures, and we hear lots of advice about these sorts of subjects, about relationships. We read lots of things. We can be influenced by music we hear or stories we read, and they can give us a warped view of what is right. And so we need to come back to the scriptures, and we need to try the advice that we hear from people against the principles that we read in the scriptures. Today, purity is laughed at, but God is holy, and he will have his people holy. So we need to remember that God's ways are the best ways. They're the best ways for society at large and us as individuals. So if we turn then to the chapter we read, Genesis 24, from this account we can draw some principles from Abraham's example and from the example of his servant when it comes to seeking a relationship or wondering what God's will is in our life concerning a relationship or a marriage. And as we see at the beginning of chapter 24, it says that Abraham was old and well stricken in age. And in the previous chapter, it speaks of Abraham's wife Sarah. She was buried. And so Abraham's son Isaac was without a mother. And Abraham's getting old, and he speaks to his most trusted servant who ruled over all that he had. And he gives him the task of going back to the land that Abraham came from to find Isaac a wife. We may have the question, what is God's will concerning a relationship or a marriage? Or we may ask, is it God's will that I should be married? And that is something that we should think about, because a lot of the time we can have an idea of what our life will be like and what we'll have in our life. Our idea of what we want in our life is not always God's plan for us. We might take scripture and say, well, of course it's God's will that I should be married, but it's not God's will that every single one of his people should be married. Jesus was not married, the Lord himself, and the Apostle Paul, it appears he wasn't married. So God's people are to do his will, whatever that may be. And we may ask that question, well, what is God's will for my life. We see from the example of Jesus there in Gethsemane, as he began the agony of sufferings that he would endure, eventually leading to the cross for his people. There in Luke 22 and verse 42, and he prays that prayer, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And there we see Jesus' submission there to the will of the Father. He had that great suffering before him. And yet, even though he asked for the cup to be removed, the suffering to be removed, but he knows and he delights to do the Father's will. And so, if it is the Father's will, which it was, that he should suffer, he is prepared to endure it. And so that is Jesus in all things is the example for his people, and how his people should be willing to walk in a way which might be the opposite of what they want in their life. And this willingness is so unnatural to us, but God is able to give it. And so when it comes to matters of relationships, we should be willing to do God's will. And sometimes this can mean the opposite of what we want. As an example, there might be somebody that we've maybe met up with a couple of times, and we're praying that God's will would be done, that God would show us his will, whether we should go forward with the relationship. And then the other person decides they don't want to carry it on, and it ends, and that's our answer. It's ended, and there we have the answer from God, the answer of providence. It's not carried on, but it's in those moments when something goes the opposite way to what we want, that then we discover whether we're really, really willing to do God's will. And though we might not know sometimes exactly what God's will is when it comes to things like this, we need that willing spirit from God to do his will, that we wouldn't just try and drive ahead with something because it's just what we want. And so we see with Abraham, he knew that it was God's will that Isaac should have a wife, because he had that promise from the Lord that his seed would inherit the land, as we see there at the beginning of Genesis 24. But there was that promise that Abraham had been given over and over again. So there's the first principle, is we need a willingness to follow God's will, even if it means the opposite of what we actually want. And that applies not just to relationships, but to every area of our lives. So Abraham sends his servant, and then we see the prayer of his servant. He's got this vitally important task. It was such an important task that Abraham had sent his most trusted servant. And he doesn't go into the town when he gets there and show off all the wealth and start trying to advertise, Isaac, but he's there and he prays. And we see the prayerful patience of the servant. And that again is a principle for us. Yes, the servant, he takes the action of going, but you see how he commits the matter into the Lord's hands. He waits outside the city. He doesn't ask for the most beautiful woman to come out. The servant is prioritizing kindness. The character of a person is the most important thing. Also, Abraham says to the servant that he's not to take a wife of the Canaanites, and the Canaanites represent those who are ungodly. And again, there's a principle. We might not be able to say that we're a believer, but if we are truly seeking the Lord, then surely we would be seeking a marriage partner who also is truly seeking the Lord. And again, with this example, it shows that actions speak louder than words. Rebekah's actions, in that she gives the camels to drink, shows her kindness. And people can say all sorts of things about themselves, but they can be making them up. And often we ourselves have, our view of ourselves is different to how other people see us. And so really the example of Abram's servant is prayerfully waiting and prayerfully committing these things unto the Lord. Again, the Lord Jesus in his example showing that it's not our will that we are to follow, but the Lord's will.
Thanks for joining us today. Look out for the next episode soon. And remember to subscribe, like, or follow the podcast to get notified each time a new episode is uploaded. And if you're enjoying the podcast, then consider sharing it with your family and friends. That's all for this episode. So until next time, goodbye.